The royal household had survived family feuds and private betrayals, but this decision struck at something more dangerous: the future of the crown itself. With one instruction, Queen Camilla removed Prince George from an important royal event. Yet before officials could enforce the order, Catherine reversed it, turning a private command into an explosive battle over authority, motherhood, and succession. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla ordered George removed from the royal founder's reception at Windsor Castle, claiming his presence would create pressure and distract from senior guests. The royal founder's reception was a formal gathering, connecting the monarchy with diplomats, military leaders, and public figures. For George, it was meant to be his first serious appearance beside William and Catherine, a carefully chosen step into the life waiting for him. George heard the news while preparing with his mother. His excitement vanished. He looked at Catherine and asked, softly, whether he had done something wrong. The question cut through every excuse. She felt hurt before anger, because this was no longer a schedule change. It was a message to her son that his place could be taken without warning. Catherine understood the stakes. George stood directly in the line of succession, meaning he was expected to inherit the crown one day. Decisions about his role belonged first to his parents, not to a private order issued around them. She knew accepting the ban would create a dangerous precedent, one that palace politics could use again. A senior aide then delivered the detail that changed everything. Camilla's instruction had already reached security, protocol officers, and the reception team. Protocol officers are the staff responsible for royal order, seating, arrivals, and ceremony. George's name had been removed from the official arrival sequence, making the humiliation real before he entered the room. Catherine moved without hesitation. She walked into the planning room, lifted the revised seating card from the table, and ordered George's name restored. Her words were calm but final. Her son would attend beside his father. Camilla entered moments later and saw the original card restored. The Queen did not move. Catherine did not step aside. No one raised a voice, yet the silence felt like a declaration of war. Then William received the message. Two competing royal instructions were moving through the palace. Every official understood that choosing one command meant rejecting the other, and the consequences would reach far beyond that evening. But the conflict was never simply about one invitation, because behind George's removal stood three people protecting three different visions of the monarchy. At the center of the palace storm stood a young prince who had never asked to become a symbol in an adult struggle. George understood that his future carried rules, expectations, and sacrifice, but he was still a child searching his parents' faces for reassurance. Catherine saw a son who needed protection. Camilla saw an institution that required control. William saw both, and knew that whatever he did next would define where his loyalty truly stood. William and Catherine had introduced George to royal responsibility slowly, protecting the ordinary parts of his childhood for as long as possible. His position in the line of succession meant he could one day inherit the throne, but his parents refused to let that future consume every year before it arrived. Each appearance was carefully chosen. Each ceremony carried a purpose. The Windsor reception was supposed to be another measured step, not a test of whether he could survive rejection from within his own family. Camilla viewed the situation differently. As King Charles reduced parts of his workload, she had taken a stronger role in household planning, helping shape guest lists, ceremonial priorities, and arrival arrangements. Household planning meant the private system used to organize royal duties and public appearances. That growing influence gave the Queen confidence, but it also made Catherine's refusal feel like a direct challenge before the very staff expected to follow her instructions. George sat alone with William after hearing that the argument was spreading through the palace. His hands remained still, as he admitted he no longer wanted to attend if his presence would cause more trouble. The words struck his father harder than anger could have done. The future king knelt beside him and promised that none of this was his fault. He repeated it until the boy finally looked at him. Catherine felt something deeper than fury. Camilla's order had treated her son like a palace asset that could be moved, removed, or restored, according to someone else's strategy. She would not allow his first major appearance to become a lesson in humiliation. Yet the queen consort saw the same resistance as deliberate defiance, a public weakening of authority disguised as maternal concern. Then William received the detail that changed the balance. A private secretary confirmed through a documented briefing note that Camilla had never consulted Charles, even though the wording of her order suggested it carried the monarch's wishes. The prince read the line twice, then asked for the original instruction. Catherine uncovered something equally disturbing. George was the only young royal removed. Other extended family members remained approved, making the claim about protecting children from pressure suddenly impossible to defend. Catherine closed her son's bedroom door after reassuring him, turned to William, and spoke without hesitation. She would not let George be diminished inside his own family. William's next question cut directly toward the truth. Who had first suggested removing him? The ban had not begun on the morning of the reception. Its true origin lay in a tense ceremony, where one brief exchange changed everything. Weeks before the Windsor reception, a smaller royal ceremony had exposed the tension everyone was pretending not to see. Nothing dramatic happened in public. No voices rose, no doors slammed, and no official rule appeared to break. Yet behind a closed door afterward, Camilla made a remark about George's future that Catherine could not forget. From that moment, the struggle stopped being distant and became deeply personal. George had attended the Royal Commonwealth Youth Ceremony at St. James's Palace, with careful limits around his role. The ceremony was a formal gathering, designed to connect young people from Commonwealth nations with the royal family. William and Catherine expected their son to observe, speak briefly, and leave without becoming the focus. Instead, Charles invited his grandson to stand beside him during a conversation with young representatives. Charles saw the moment as natural. The king spoke warmly to George, then asked him to listen as the students described their hopes for the future. Guests responded with clear affection, and senior officials praised the boy's calm manner. For the monarch, it became a simple image of continuity, the present crown standing beside the generation expected to carry it forward. Camilla felt the balance shift. She had helped arrange the official program, meaning the planned order of speeches, introductions, and royal appearances. George's unexpected prominence drew attention away from the structure she had approved. Later, she told an aide in a recorded planning conversation that the boy was being introduced too quickly and could begin overshadowing senior royals. Catherine heard something worse minutes later. Camilla told William that George needed to learn he could not be placed at the center simply because of his future title. The princess stopped outside the doorway, stunned by the coldness of the remark. To her, the boy had done nothing except respond when his grandfather invited him forward. The point of no return came inside a private antechamber after the ceremony. An antechamber was a smaller room used for waiting or private conversations beside a formal hall. Camilla told William that George should be excluded from the next major reception until the household understands who controls the program. Catherine entered before he could answer. The queen turned, but the words had already landed. An aide later created a restricted planning note recommending fewer appearances for George. The document carried Camilla's approval mark, yet neither parent received a copy. William discovered its existence only after asking who had first proposed the Windsor removal. Catherine pulled the old ceremony program from a drawer and placed it beside the new reception list. The dates aligned. So did the language. Her confusion hardened into certainty. The Windsor ban had never been about protecting George. It was the execution of a plan born after the Commonwealth ceremony. Catherine closed the file and made her decision. she would confront Camilla before the guests arrived. And when the two women finally stood face to face, polite royal language could no longer hide what the argument was truly about. The confrontation unfolded behind a closed drawing room door, beyond cameras, courtiers, and polite explanations. Catherine arrived alone and asked for no permission. Camilla was already waiting, certain the princess would accept the order once its reasoning was made clear. Instead, the future queen delivered a refusal so calm that it unsettled the woman across from her. This was not a request for reconsideration. It was an override. Catherine knew less than 2 hours remained before the reception. Security teams needed a final arrival order, while protocol officers, the staff responsible for seating, entrances, and ceremonial sequence, needed one clear command. Every minute of delay increased the chance that George would discover his exclusion through a guard, an aide, or an altered place card. She would not allow that humiliation to reach him. Camilla insisted senior royal events could not be shaped by emotion. The Queen argued that George's attendance had never been formally guaranteed, and that protecting the evening required difficult choices. Catherine listened without interrupting, then answered with brutal simplicity. Removing a child after he had prepared was not protection, it was punishment. Camilla's expression hardened. She accused the princess of using George's place in the line of succession to bypass royal authority. That position meant he stood directly in the order of those expected to inherit the throne. Catherine replied that his future role was exactly why decisions about him could not be made secretly, especially by someone who had never consulted his parents. Camilla slid the revised guest list across the table. Catherine pushed it back without looking down. George would enter beside William and his mother as originally planned. The words were quiet, but they landed like a public declaration. Then the Queen made her strongest claim. Charles had approved the restriction. Catherine did not hesitate. William had already spoken to the king in a private telephone conversation, and the monarch had confirmed that he gave no approval. The silence changed at once. Camilla now understood that her wording had been exposed. The conflict was no longer only about George. It was about whether she had used Charles's authority without his consent. Catherine rose and placed the original program beside Camilla's hand. The palace had 15 minutes to restore every copy, every seating card, and every instruction. Her anger never broke through her voice, which made the command feel even more final. Camilla refused to withdraw her order. She remained seated, and said the household would have to decide which instruction carried greater weight. That refusal pushed the crisis beyond both women. William would now have to defend his son, and Charles would have to judge his wife. The emotional battle had reached its peak, but the decisive question remained unanswered. Who actually possessed the power to settle it? Royal power rarely announced itself with shouting. It moved through signatures, schedules, private secretaries, and carefully chosen words. Yet that night, the palace machinery had stalled, because two women had issued opposing commands. Every official understood the danger of choosing incorrectly. Supporting Camilla could humiliate the direct heir's family. Supporting Catherine could weaken the Queen's standing. Only Charles and William could break the deadlock, but both men feared the cost. Charles held final ceremonial authority as sovereign, meaning the reigning monarch had the last word over official royal events. William and Catherine, however, still held parental responsibility for George and the duty of preparing him for life in the direct line of succession. That balance mattered, because Camilla could advise on schedules and coordinate appearances, but she could not redefine the boy's family or constitutional role without consultation. Charles felt trapped. Defending his wife might protect her dignity, but allowing the order to stand would suggest that his name could be used to sideline his grandson without permission. Correcting the decision would restore proper authority, yet it would also expose Camilla before the same household she expected to obey her. William entered with controlled fury. He hated that George had been pulled into an adult struggle. but he measured every word. One reckless exchange could divide the family in front of staff and turn a private dispute into a public fracture. The future king made one point clear: his son would not carry the punishment for someone else's fear. Charles sat with both guest lists before him. One carried George's name, the other did not. The king removed his glasses and placed them on the table without speaking. His silence revealed more than anger. It showed a husband torn between loyalty to his wife and responsibility to the crown. Then the monarch's private secretary confirmed the most damaging detail through a documented briefing note. Camilla's office had used the phrase, "His Majesty's preference," even though Charles had never reviewed the change. The words gave the ban false authority and turned a family disagreement into a challenge to the king's own control. William drew the final line. Unless the original arrangement was restored, he and Catherine would leave the reception with George. The event would lose the Prince and Princess of Wales, and the absence would be impossible to explain. Charles reached for a pen. He crossed out the revised instruction and wrote that George's attendance was confirmed. The movement was small, but it ended the constitutional uncertainty. The decision was settled. The family was not. George had regained his place at the reception, but inside the private rooms of Windsor, the consequences of Catherine's victory were only beginning. The correction moved through Windsor in minutes. Security restored George's name. Staff replaced the altered cards. The arrival order returned to its original form. Outwardly, the palace had solved the problem. Privately, nothing felt resolved. Camilla had been overruled. Catherine had exposed the weakness of her command, and Charles had been forced to choose between them. The reception could continue, but the family entering that room was no longer the same family that had planned it. Protocol officers rushed to repair the damage, restoring George's place beside William and Catherine, and correcting instructions already given to guards. Protocol officers were the staff responsible for royal seating, entrances, and ceremonial order. Their hurried work mattered because even one mistaken command at the door could turn a private dispute into a public humiliation. Senior staff received a second warning. No one was to discuss the argument with guests. Yet the changed cards, revised arrival sheets, and whispered instructions made the truth impossible to hide completely. Something serious had been reversed, and every person involved knew whose authority had failed. Camilla returned to her private rooms, carrying the sting of defeat. The confrontation had happened behind closed doors, but she still felt exposed before the household. The Queen removed her reception gloves, placed them sharply on a chair, and told her dresser she would attend only because withdrawing would prove she had lost. Catherine felt relief, but no victory. George would attend, yet protecting him had widened the distance between her and Camilla. The princess knew the Queen would remember the override long after the reception ended. Success had saved her son from rejection, but it had also created a wound inside the family. Charles entered his wife's room, with no aides present. The king warned her that using his name without consent could never happen again. His words were measured, but final. Camilla heard them as something colder than correction. She heard betrayal from the man she expected to defend her. George sensed the tension before anyone explained it. He looked at Catherine and quietly asked whether Camilla was angry with him. The question exposed the cruelest consequence of the entire struggle. A conflict supposedly managed by adults had already reached the child they claimed to be protecting. Catherine knelt beside him and straightened his collar. She told him he belonged at the event because he was loved, not because anyone had won an argument. George nodded, but his uncertainty remained. William then approached Camilla moments before the family entered the reception. He asked for one private conversation without Charles, aides, or palace officials. With the institution temporarily silenced, the conflict was about to become painfully human, between two people who could no longer hide behind rank. There were no secretaries in the room, no written orders on the table, and no monarch standing between them. William faced Camilla, not as the Prince of Wales confronting the Queen, but as a father speaking to the woman who had excluded his son. His anger was controlled, almost quiet, which made every word heavier. He did not demand an apology for himself. He demanded a boundary, and made clear what would happen if it was ever crossed again. William chose a small private sitting room before the reception, and deliberately kept every aide outside. The Prince of Wales was the title given to the monarch's direct adult heir, but in that room, rank mattered less than parenthood. He acknowledged that Camilla carried real responsibilities within the household, yet he told her those duties did not include making unilateral decisions about George, Charlotte, or Louis. Camilla answered with wounded pride. She said Catherine had embarrassed her before palace staff and weakened the authority she had spent years trying to build. The Queen believed the public correction made her appear powerless. William did not soften. He replied that the first humiliation had been inflicted on George, a child who had been prepared for an event and then told he no longer belonged there. Camilla finally admitted what had been hiding beneath every argument. In a private recorded conversation with William, she said she feared the younger generation was being moved forward too quickly, replacing her before she had fully secured her place beside Charles. The confession changed the air between them. This had never been only about schedules. It was about fear. William leaned into the truth she had tried to avoid. George was not her rival. He was not a threat to her marriage, her position, or her years beside the king. The boy was family, and he should never be treated as an opponent in a struggle he did not understand. Camilla then revealed that she had expected Charles to support her automatically. She never believed Catherine would challenge the order so directly, and she never imagined the monarch would correct it in writing. The Queen's certainty had collapsed because she had mistaken private influence for permanent control. William established a new rule. No instruction involving George, Charlotte, or Louis could be issued without written approval from him or Catherine. Written approval meant a clear, recorded decision that could not later be twisted or falsely attributed to someone else. Camilla lowered her eyes after a long silence and agreed. William opened the door, but he did not leave until she promised George would receive no coldness during the reception. The family entered together moments later. The boundary had been spoken in private, but its meaning would be judged in public when George stepped into the reception that nearly excluded him. By the following morning, the palace's attempted silence had been overwhelmed by a single image. Prince George entered Windsor, between William and Catherine, composed but fully aware that the evening carried unusual weight. A few steps behind them walked Camilla. To the public, it looked like a formal family arrival. Once the truth emerged, however, the photograph became something larger. A portrait of a mother's refusal, a child's restored place, and a royal hierarchy suddenly redrawn. George attended the royal founder's reception exactly as his parents had planned. The event was a formal gathering, linking the monarchy with diplomats, military leaders, charity representatives, and public servants. He greeted guests carefully and stayed close to William and Catherine, who guided him through every introduction without allowing the tension around them to take control. Palace officials moved quickly to contain the story. They released a controlled statement describing the altered schedule as an internal misunderstanding. An internal misunderstanding meant a private planning error rather than an open conflict. Yet the explanation lacked the emotional force of what had actually happened, and it failed to answer why George's name had been removed at all. Catherine's supporters praised her as a mother who had protected her son from humiliation. Camilla's defenders argued that the Queen had tried to shield the boy from pressure before he was ready. The public debate became fierce, because both sides claimed to be defending George, yet only one side had asked how the decision made him feel. Charles carried the cost in silence. The king appeared strained, as attention moved away from the charitable purpose of the reception and toward the family dispute. He had restored his grandson's place, but he also knew the correction had exposed weakness inside his household. The Royal Chronicle captured the national mood the next morning. Its front page carried a full-width photograph of Catherine's hand, resting on George's shoulder beneath the headline, "A Mother Overrules the Queen." Outside Windsor Castle, a crowd gathered holding small signs that read, "Let George grow with love." A broadcaster then revealed through a documented palace timeline that George's name had been removed and restored less than 2 hours before the reception. The detail confirmed that Catherine's intervention had been immediate, personal, and decisive. Camilla approached George during the evening. The Queen paused, offered a measured smile, and told him he had handled the reception well. He thanked her politely, and the exchange softened the most visible tension without erasing what had happened. The public believed Catherine had won. But applause could not decide what the night truly meant. The headlines declared a winner, yet the monarchy's real verdict would be found in the boundaries permanently rewritten behind palace doors. In the end, the Windsor confrontation was not remembered because one royal woman defeated another. It endured because a child's place inside his own family was defended before palace authority could turn rejection into precedent. Catherine's override forced the monarchy to confront a truth it had ignored for too long. Duty cannot be taught through humiliation, and hierarchy cannot justify cruelty. George entered the reception as a young prince, but he left knowing his parents would protect both his future and his heart. Charles acted first. Following the reception, the king issued a formal clarification, stating that decisions involving the Wales children must come from William and Catherine, except where the sovereign's direct constitutional duties applied. Constitutional duties meant the monarch's official responsibilities under the crown. The ruling mattered because it ended any confusion over who controlled George's preparation for royal life. The palace changed its procedures as well. No royal office could use Charles's name, approval, or implied preference without written confirmation. That small reform closed the gap Camilla had used and ensured that private influence could never again be presented as the monarch's command. Catherine sat with George the following morning and told him something he would remember for years. Belonging to the monarchy did not mean surrendering his dignity. The princess made clear that duty demanded courage, but it never required a child to accept humiliation in silence. William gave his son a second lesson. Leadership was not proven by obeying every instruction without question. Sometimes, strength meant recognizing when a line had been crossed and defending it calmly. George listened closely, no longer asking whether the conflict had been his fault. Camilla kept her title and continued attending future events, but the Queen lost unilateral influence over the public schedules of George, Charlotte, and Louis. Charles also accepted his share of responsibility. By avoiding conflict for too long, the monarch had allowed uncertainty to become a crisis. Supporting the corrected decision restored part of the trust he had strained with William and Catherine. Camilla later met George in a quiet corridor. She offered a direct apology for making him feel unwanted. The boy accepted it without excitement or bitterness, answering with the composed kindness his parents had taught him. Catherine's action was not remembered as rebellion against the crown. It was understood as protection of what the crown was supposed to serve: continuity, responsibility, family, and human dignity. Camilla's ban failed. Catherine's override stood. George's future would be shaped by his parents, not by palace rivalry. There was no further battle to fight. His place had been restored. Royal authority had been defined, and the future of the crown would not be built by breaking the child destined to inherit it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.